comes an incident where you are dispatched to the site of a B-52 crash or some kind of a landing involving a B-52?
Well, initially we were told that we had to go into the jungle to recover a downed aircraft, which was pretty standard. The aircraft had crashed in Laos. At the time, we weren't really aware of what the circumstances were, other than the fact it had been downed. It wasn't until several years later that I discovered what the details were concerning the B-52 and how it came to be in the jungle. But we received our orders from MACV headquarters in Saigon, which essentially said go in, recover flight recorders, any survivors if there were any, and bring them back out. So we crossed over into the border of Laos, and it took us about 3 or 4 days to get there, and we found the aircraft at the coordinates which had been given us. Apparently they had been able to pinpoint its location by its locator beacon. And when we got there, initially what we found was pretty unusual, and we didn't really give it much credence or thought at that point until we started looking around. And what we found was the B-52 was completely intact. There was no visible damage. There was no cut through the jungle that looked any of that kind of stuff. And the only damage that we saw to the aircraft was where the aircraft was sitting on the underside of the fuselage, and that was from the pressure of the aircraft sitting there. The aircraft had a full load of bombs, a full load of fuel in it, and we took a very big chance in blowing one of the hatches open. And when we went into the aircraft, what we discovered was the crew, the entire crew, were still in their safety seats, still in their harnesses, and they were all dead.
Mutilated how?
We didn't know it at the time, but they were mutilated in what we now refer to as the classic sense of the word. Eyes were missing, sections of their faces were skinned completely away, and the bone was cleaned like white. It was white bone, teeth, sections of the neck and throat all the way down to the esophagus. Their tongues had been removed.
So basically reminiscent of the
cattle mutilations, right. And there was no blood. And usually in a situation like that, you would expect to see blood all over the place. And in confined quarters like that, you would expect to be slipping and sliding in it. Well, we weren't any. The very fact that there wasn't any was remarkable to us. So after we spent about an hour looking through the ship, collecting dog tags and taking photographs of everything. We pulled the flight recorder out of the aircraft, and we sealed the plane and filled it with explosive charges. More of it. I left Vietnam in 1971 after a 2-year tour of duty there, and was sent to Germany and all. And by this time I had married, and my wife at that point was. So we took a transfer to England, where she was assigned to the dependent schools at RAF Chicksands, which is an Air Force Security Services command base, a big air listening base.
Right, so you're a civilian by this time?
I'm a civilian by this time.
Okay.
And I guess we'd been at Chicksands for a month, and I was at the officers club one day, and I happened to meet an old commanding officer of mine from my Army days. He had retired from the Army several years before with the government, and I said, sure, I'd love to. And so he set it up with the interviews and everything, and I got hired by Air Force Security Services Command as a data analyst. And I was assigned to the analysis section of Air Force Security Services Command at Chicksands, and my job essentially was to analyze information and material that came through the Big Ear site. And the job itself was pretty standard, pretty normal, as normal as you can get in circumstances like that. And I worked at it for close to 3 years before I came into my office one day and was asked to analyze a document called Grudge Bluebook Report number 13.
Okay, let me stop you right there. This is July 1977.
July 27th, 1977.
This is the day that the alleged Grudge Bluebook Special Report 13 across your desk. Let me straighten out on that one point.
Mm-hmm.
There's some contention as to whether it was Grudge or Bluebook that was responsible for this particular special report. Was it Grudge or Bluebook? Something out of that.
I believe it was Bluebook, but I believe it was a mistake on their part. Mm-hmm. The document was entitled Grudge/Bluebook Report 13. Now, the government for close to 40 years has denied the existence of Bluebook Report 13, giving all kinds of screwball explanations as regards to why, and one of the most predominant is, well, because it was number 13, and 13 is an unlucky number, and I've never known the government to pay any kind of attention to that kind of thing ever.
What I had heard was that they had started on 13 and got a whole bunch of new material that brought it in a whole different direction, and so they decided to just consolidate 13 into 14, which they were working on contemporaneously, and they just decided to combine it into one.
Well, again, I don't believe that. What I think happened is, based on information that I've been able to get a hold of through the years and through comments from other people who've been involved in investigating UFOs, is that at that point they figured that report number 12 would be the last report they ever issued. And somewhere along the line they made a mistake, and they decided that they needed to produce a report that filled in a certain level of government official on what was really happening. And they entitled it, quite by accident, Bluebook Report 13. And when they realized the mistake that they had made, they jerked it out of the channels immediately, retitled it to Grudge Bluebook 13 because it had Grudge material in it from way back in Project Grudge days before Bluebook had been renamed.
All right, so you get this courier pouch.
Mm-hmm.
It's sealed.
Mm-hmm.
All right. It's got all kinds of writing on it that lets you know that this is top secret. What was your clearance at the time?
My clearance at the time was what they call a Crypto 14. 13 or 14, I believe it was. Which essentially meant my clearance was higher than the president's clearance as far as material and information.
Is that possible?
Well, when you consider every 4 years you got this redneck who comes into the office from Texas or Georgia or California or wherever, and considering the sometimes the quality of the presidential candidates, what would you think?
That's the way I would do it. That is the way I would do it. I've often thought about that, but there are people out there who will scoff at that.
Well, I don't think the American public realizes just how limited the president's powers really are. Presidential office is realistically vacated every 4 years. Now, you have a person who will sit in office for 4 years and who literally has his finger on the button. But he's not really doing the job of government. You've got your agencies like the CIA, the DIA, MSI, you know, and then your Labor Department and all those things that are doing the real work of the matter. And realistically, all the president really is a figurehead, because he just doesn't have the time to sit there and do, you know, the work of governing every particular segment of American society. Which is not a bad way to do things if you can delegate properly, but if you're not informed of what is in fact going on, and the government, or a certain faction of the government says, well, this guy's a clown and he could cause us some real problems, we're not going to tell him about this or that or the other, you know, then you have a real situation where it's possible that these things can happen. Now, you got to bear in mind, too, that President Reagan was in his second term of office when he started his alien speeches.
Mm-hmm. True. All right, let's get back to this document you allegedly saw. Now, it was your job to open up this document, take a look at it, analyze it, and evaluate it as far as credibility.
But it was my job to read the document and analyze what we call the probability factor of factual information. Yeah.
All right. What basically did it contain? What met your eyes when you opened it?
Well, aside from the standard military jargon clearance, you know, monitored viewing only, this kind of thing, you know, the special codes that go along with it and that kind of thing. The report itself contained several items. Most notably were a series of photographs, several dozen photographs of things like autopsy reports on alien bodies, photographs of the alien bodies, photographs of technology, recovered disc, and this kind of thing, and tons and tons and tons of technical reports. And there was also a report from Dr. J. Allen Hynek. And that report essentially said, and Hynek's words at the time was that although he had not seen the evidence firsthand, based on what he read, he believed that this was true evidence, and based on the material he had seen.
Okay.
Now, several years later, I bearded Dr. Hynek in his den, so to speak. Hynek and I had both been asked to work as advisors on a production of Barry and Enright's called Strange as It Seems, which was supposed to be a pilot program in answer to That's Incredible. And they had a UFO segment on there, and a fellow by the name of Travis Walton and I went from APRO, and Hynek, unbeknown to me, had been flown out from Illinois at that time and asked to act as you know, an advisor or a speaker on it. Hynek and I were in the green room, and I flat out asked him, I said, you know, what about the report 13? Well, Hynek said, well, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, look, I've seen the report. I saw the report that you wrote and was included in it. And he looked at me and he said, well, you know. I said, well, what gives? And I started to get very angry about it. And he said, look, don't try and involve me in any of your bullshit. Simple fact of the matter is that to this day, I will deny any knowledge of Report 13. And I said, how can you do that? And I'll never forget this as long as I live. He said, who are they going to believe? Me or some shavetail who's been at this for less than a year and who everybody thinks is lying anyway?
So Hynek basically bowed out of that whole...
Is what he did.
Okay.
But you have to bear in mind that Hynek, when Blue Book ended, he issued a statement that said that there were no such things as UFOs or any of this kind of stuff. And then when he was free of government service, did a complete turnaround and started the International Center for UFO Studies.
Right, because he obviously believed that UFOs were real. So why do you suppose he denied 13? What do you think was his motivation? I mean, that would be the ultimate achievement of his ufological career.
Well, I think he denied it for a couple of reasons. The first reason being because he signed the Secrecies Agreement, or the Secrecies Act, which essentially said that he acknowledged the fact that the government had the right to try him without benefit of a public trial, deny him any retirement benefits that he might have had coming, imprison him, or whatever. He had a lot to lose. That and the fact, too, that the information that was in it was pretty incredible to begin with. And he could see what I was encountering at the time. You know, I had people calling me a liar and a pervert and everything else. And they were doing a real good hatchet job on me at that point.
Okay. All right, so you see the document, and what kind of a credibility rating what kind of rating did you assign it?
Well, initially I looked at it and I read it through very carefully, and I thought that this was a joke. I really did think it was a joke until I got to the section of photographs, which I recognized. Those were the photographs of the mutilated bodies in the B-52 that we recovered in Vietnam. I recognized those photographs because I took them.
Okay.
And in the report, it said, essentially, the story behind it is that the last transmission from the aircraft stated that they were under attack from a bright light. And this apparently was repeated 2 or 3 times, and then all communication with the aircraft broke off.
And this is the first you knew that the incident that you had investigated was connected to UFOs.
Right. This was the very first thing, very first time I realized what was going on. Then I started rereading everything, looking at the photographs. I had some photographic experience. I tried to see if they were tricks. I looked at the photographs under a magnifying glass, realizing that there was a possibility that these things could have been manufactured in a good special effects lab. But I saw no sign of it, and based on the other material that I saw in it, and based on those photographs that I saw, I eventually decided that there was a very high probability that the material was true. And at that point, I assigned to it a 98% probability rating of being accurate information.
Okay. So you had possession of the documents for quite some time then, in order to...
Well, I had possession of the documents for about 10 hours.
10 hours.
But I was in a controlled environment, too.
You were allowed to go over it with a magnifying glass?
Yeah.
The kind of thing that they wanted you to do?
Yeah. You have to realize is that when you're in a situation like that where you're looking at secure documents, you're locked into your cubbyhole. There's essentially a guard on where you're at. If you've got to go to the bathroom or anything like that, you call the duty officer. The duty officer comes in with a guard. He takes the documents, locks them away, signs for them on your receipt slip. He leaves the room. You get up, you go do whatever you got to do, go to the bathroom, get a drink. When you're ready, you go back in. You call the duty officer. The duty officer brings the documents back to you. He unlocks them, puts them on your desk. You sign for him. He leaves, locks your door, and the guard goes back on station. And it's a very long, drawn-out process. So if you figure you have to go to the bathroom in about 10 minutes, you better start doing it now, because you're going to wet yourself.
The reason I ask that is because you seem to recall a lot of details about the document. You have the serial number J1327 Delta, inside a publication with red tape, code red security precautions, title, analysis report. I mean, you seem to have the whole thing pretty much committed to memory. Did you do that on purpose?
No, I have a pretty phenomenal memory to a certain extent, and that information at that time was pretty fresh in my mind. Years, and I don't remember it as well now as I did then, but I do remember the pertinent facts about it.
When was this dictated? I mean, this came from some notes that you dictated into a cassette recorder, I guess.
Because they were dictated into a cassette recorder.
You did it from memory?
Basically from memory. I returned to the United States the first week of June, and I'm sorry, first week of August. And the date I actually viewed the document was June the 27th, not July the 27th, and I was back in the States about the middle of July. Okay. And August, September, I guess it was about September, Stanton Friedman was giving a speech at Pima Community College here in Tucson on UFOs. And I'd seen the flyers because at that point I was working as a security guard, and one of the duty assignments was out at Pima Community College. And just out of curiosity, I went to Stanton Friedman's speech. And during the course of his speech, Stanton said that there was no such thing as Blue Book Report 13. And after he delivered his speech, I approached him and I said, that's not true. There is a Blue Book 13. I've read it. I've seen it. And with a matter of minutes, Stanton Friedman, Alan Benz, and Jim Lorenzen, who was the head of APRO at the time, and I were on our way over to the APRO offices, where I spent about 3 to 4 hours talking to them while they were recording everything. And then several months later, Wendell Stevens and I talked about it. I transcribed several pages of notes concerning concerning what I saw for Wendell, and I had recorded some cassettes for Wendell also, trying to recall more detail of what I'd seen.
Okay. What was the document dated? I have it here as 1953 to 1963, with the 1963 in parentheses.
Yeah.
Is that the actual way it was on the document?
Right.
Okay. So, to your knowledge, the document then was published when? 63?
That version of the document was, but the document originally started in the 50s, and it had been continually updated and annotated.
Okay. But basically, as far as you know, it was not more recent than 63?
Not at that point, no.
The reason I ask that is because it's, according to your recollection, it mentions close encounters of the first kind, close encounters of the second kind, close encounters of the third kind.
Right.
Are these not classifications that Dr. Hynek came up with in the 70s?
They were originally classifications that were released as being Dr. Hynek's in the 70s, as far as I know, but that was what was in the document.
Okay. So you're saying then that they had, Dr. Hynek had either originated these earlier, or someone else had originated them and he borrowed them?
Yeah, that's possible.
Okay. All right, so now you've seen the document, you're shipped back to the States, okay, in a somewhat of a hurry, I would take it.
I reported to work like I normally do. I dropped the wife off at school and the kids off at the daycare center. I signed into my workstation and was immediately informed that the base commander wanted to see me. And I was escorted to the base commander's office by 2 air security police officers. Well, I had no idea what was going on. And I said, okay, what the hell, you know. So I got up to his office and was promptly informed that I was to wait. And I waited about 30 to 40 minutes, and he finally called me into his office and told me that my services for Air Security Services Command were no longer needed, that I was being returned to the United States. To which I promptly replied, well, technically I'm a dependent husband. Just debrief me, give me my final paycheck, and I'll go home. To which he replied, you are being sent back to the United States. And I said, well, at least let me call my wife down at the school and tell her what's going on. And he said, you are being held incommunicado. You will be immediately taken to RAF Lakenheath and put on a flight back to the United States. Which is what happened. I was put on a flight. They drove me to RAF Lakenheath, and I was put on a MAC flight, handed my final paycheck right then and there, and flown in to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and cut loose. Or the air base by Fort Dix, New Jersey. And so the first thing I did was try to contact my wife on the telephone. When I tried to contact her, I dialed our home phone number in England, and it rang, and then a man's voice answered the phone. Hello, who is this? Well, this is Bill. Is Stephanie there? Click. Hang up. I did this 4 or 5 times then, and then over the period of several months, I must have done it at least 4 or 5 dozen more times. Then I tried to call some of my friends. People that I had been associated with the medieval society over there. That was one of my hobbies, and getting dressed up in armor and going out in the park on weekends. And
Society for Creative Anachronism?
Well, it was similar to the Society for Creative Anachronism, but we used to beat the hell out of each other with swords on the weekends and have a good old time doing it.
Sounds like fun.
So anyway, I tried to contact them. I'd dial their numbers, the phone would ring, a man's voice would answer it, hello, click, hang up on me. And at this point, I was becoming an emotional basket case. I really was. I mean, I was an emotional wreck at that point. you know, all kinds of things go through your head at that point, and UFOs were the furthest thing from my mind. And one of the things was that I thought that my wife was having an affair with somebody who wanted to get me out of there, and who decided that they were just going to fire me and boot me out. And that was a reasonable explanation at the time. I didn't know what else to think, because I certainly wasn't thinking about UFOs or the job that I was doing. I wasn't told that the job I did was poor or anything. In fact, I had received several commendations for the work that I did.
Nobody ever mentioned to you that you were being shipped out because you had seen this stuff?
No, no.
So that never occurred to you?
It never occurred to me at that point. And eventually, as things got progressively worse, I gave up trying to contact my wife. And I haven't seen my wife or kids in 15 years.
What point did you give up? How many months into this whole scenario?
I guess it was pretty close to 2 years.
2 years.
Before I finally just said, I got to get on with my life. By this time, I had been involuntarily committed to Camino Community Hospital because at one point I tried to commit suicide. At the end of the 2-week period that I was committed, I didn't say anything about UFOs or anything because I really wasn't thinking about that all that much. By this time, I had talked with Stanton Friedman, and I started doing research and everything. And I had discussed the possibility with several people, but at the end of it, after the doctor had interviewed me and several members of my family, he decided that I was the only sane one in the family and cut me loose. Fooled him. But in any event, it was about 2 years.
It's about 2 years?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure you're aware speculation is that this whole thing was confabulated by you as some kind of an excuse or kind of a defense against
desertion and marital problems and stuff like that. Yeah, well, I understand that, and I'm very familiar with that. And yes, it could be a possibility, but it's not. You know, I'm not saying that my marriage to my wife was absolutely the most perfect marriage in the world. I don't think any marriage is perfect. We had our problems like anybody else, but it was certainly not something that would make me desert my wife and kids.
Okay, now flash forward a little bit to where they start to try to get you. This is the part that a lot of people find interesting. All of a sudden,
Well, all of a sudden, I started having some pretty weird experiences. My apartment. And I didn't realize this at the time, that it was an actual attempt on my life. I later was able to figure it out. I had gone over to a friend's house to do some leather work for him, and they were going to give me a free meal. And back at that period of time in my life, a free meal was next to getting a bar of gold, as far as I was concerned, because it meant survival. So I went over to his house, and we watched television and had dinner. I did the work for him. We sat there and had a nice old evening, and I spent the night over at his house, and he gave me a ride back to my apartment the next day. And when we got there, we found that my apartment had been guttered by fire. Now, Alan Benz of, at that time, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, out of curiosity, got a hold of the official fire inspector's report, which showed that it was, in fact, arson. A firebomb had been dumped in.
That's right. I've spoken to Alan about that, and he has confirmed that indeed was the case. But wasn't there an incident before that involving like a Lincoln Town car?
I had taken a trip to Sierra Vista to visit my dad to discuss some business. I was trying to start a store that specialized in custom-made leather goods, and I needed to talk to him about helping me find some financing. And I jumped on the back of my motorcycle and was cruising down to Sierra Vista. Now, back in those days, there were certain times of the day when the road was fairly deserted. It's not like it is now with constant traffic or anything like that. Of course, that was back in the dark ages, back when they were still using covered wagons and mules. But Anyway, what happened was I was cruising down Interstate 10, and there was a black car that was like a limousine, and I figured, yeah, I would call it a Lincoln Town car because that's what it looked like, but it started pacing me through the traffic. When I slowed down, it slowed down. When I sped up, it sped up, and it kept pretty equal distance the whole way. And I guess about 10 miles this side of the Sierra Vista turnoff, we hit a stretch of road where there was no oncoming traffic, and he started speeding up. And I happened to see it happen to the back of my rearview mirror. And having ridden motorcycles for quite some time, and having had people, take advantage of the fact that I was on a motorcycle, I sort of instinctively pulled as far to the right as I possibly could, thinking this individual would pass me. Well, as I pulled over, it pulled over. It kept me in a direct line right between its headlights. And it occurred to me that something wasn't right here. So it accelerated, it came up after me, and just as it was about maybe 10 or 15 yards away from me, I swerved to the left, and it came shooting right by me where I would have been. Went on down the road.
You swerved to the left?
I swerved to the left toward the middle lane.
Okay.
No, I was in the right lane at this point.
Okay. So you swerve over to the left.
Yeah.
And it goes shooting on by you.
It goes shooting on by me, and I'm sort of thinking to myself, well, okay, he's going to keep going. All of a sudden, he slammed on the brakes, did a 180, swung that thing around, and started coming back at me again. At this point, it occurred to me that they were kind of serious about this. So I cut off into the desert, and they tried to follow me into the desert, and they got about 20 or 30 yards into the desert before the car started to bog down in the soft dirt. And I stayed in the desert all the way towards Sierra Vista. I just sort of cut a diagonal path toward the Sierra Vista and wound up coming out on the road toward Huachuca City. And I rode on in Sierra Vista and told my dad what happened. Of course, my father poo-pooed and said, it's all in your imagination and all this kind of thing. And but he agreed to follow me back to Tucson, and we made it back to Tucson. And then shortly after that, the fire incident took place at the apartment.
Okay. And then there was another incident that took place in Virginia where they supposedly you tripped over some cords or something. Fell on your face, and all of a sudden, gunfire, automatic gunfire through your window. Is that right?
Well, you got to bear in mind too that between then and that time, there were several other attempts on my life.
Okay,
People,
15.
Total of 15 attempts.
Okay.
And realistically, some of them could have been legitimate accidents, but at this point, I choose not to think that because there were just too many of them. People had tried to run me over on the street, run me off the road. This kind of thing. But the incident you're referring to, I had just divorced my second wife who deserted me. As the saucer spins. And I was living in a town called Crewe, Virginia. And I was renting a house which was just, I guess, a block and a half down from the local police station. I was in pretty sorry shape emotionally at that time also. Seems to be the story of my life. But because, it was pretty traumatic having a wife walk out on you. I don't know if you've ever had that happen, but it's a big
I better never have it happen.
it's been it's a big change in your life. A big sudden traumatic change. And I was moping around the house, and I was watching a baseball game. It must have been about 7, 8 o'clock at night. And I'd gone into the kitchen to get a can of soda, came back in the living room, and in actuality, what I did was I bent over to tie my shoelace from the sneakers I was wearing. And I tripped as I was going over and landed flat on my face. And just as that happened, machine gun fire, automatic weapons fire, started cutting the front of the house, through the front of the house. And I rolled toward a brick retaining wall, which I guess was about 4 feet high, and then it was wood construction from the rest of it up. And just rolled toward the wall, and it scared me so badly, I literally wet myself. I didn't know what was going on at that point. And anyway, it seemed like it lasted forever, and it couldn't have been more than maybe 5 or 6 minutes of this. But when it stopped, I mean, my ears were ringing, and I heard what I thought was a car squealing off. Well, it took the local police department, which was just around the corner from my house, a half hour to get there. And when they got there, the Nottoway County Sheriff's Department was there, the police department, and the Virginia State Police. And ultimately, they decided that there must have been a total of approximately 15,000 rounds emptied into the house.
15,000?
15,000 rounds.
So obviously this case was investigated.
Oh, yeah, it was investigated, and they thought initially that it was my father-in-law, who was ex-Army officer, who decided that he was going to settle a score with me that I had no idea was going on, other than the fact that...
Having to do with the wife that
yeah,
just deserted you.
Yeah.
But they never were able to pin it on...
They weren't able to pin it on anyone, really, and they just sort of left it as an unsolved case. Of course, I was working for a radio station at the time, and I was a public figure in a local community, and I had a fairly controversial show.
Okay, so it's possible then that in that particular case, for instance...
In that particular case, it could have been anything or anyone.
Some maniac with a gun.
Yeah.
Okay, but bottom line, you think that most of these attempts have been, what, signals to you?
Either an attempt to silence me or to motivate me into certain directions, I believe.
By whom?
I don't know.
Speculate.
The government.
Okay. Then that leads to the next question. Wouldn't it be more wouldn't it behoove them more to just leave you alone and not attract attention, not get your mind going in the direction of, hey, I may be onto something because somebody's trying to kill me?
Unless, of course, they want me to go into a certain direction and do certain things.
It's a hell of a way to tell you.
Well, when I'm left alone, at this point and in recent years, I haven't gotten involved in UFOs. In fact, when I was in Virginia, I wanted absolutely nothing to do with them.
Okay, but in recent years, you've started UFONet? You're speaking here in Tucson.
I've started UFONet. I've become involved very publicly in the UFO research and investigations.
Anybody tried to kill you recently?
No, not recently.
When was the last attempt? Was that the one in Virginia?
No, there was one more attempt 2 weeks prior to the conference that took place in 1989 at Las Vegas, Nevada. I believe it was an attempt. I had a butane tank in my front yard of the trailer where I live explode. The tank had just been installed. It had just been tested by the butane company, and it had been certified as being secure. And when it exploded, it took out my car, 2 storage sheds, and burnt the living hell out of the front lawn. I ultimately went digging through the ashes and found what I thought to be some sort of detonator, or a piece of some sort of detonator. Whether it was or not, I've got no way of telling. But since the conference has taken place in 1989, it's been very quiet. I haven't had any problems. I've been very busy with UFONet and doing the work that I've been doing and gathering information.
Tell me about UFONet. What exactly are you trying to accomplish with UFONet? What is its structure? What is it doing?
Well, UFONet is an anachronism for UFO Information Network. And the whole idea behind UFONet was to be able to open a place or create a situation where there could be a repository of information from all individuals and organizations that deal in UFOs, and make that information available to all organizations without getting involved in the internal politics of each organization, without issuing a pronouncement on whether a case is valid or invalid, but to be able to essentially provide a place for legitimate investigators and organizations to come to and find information they needed that might possibly fill in a gap on a case that they're investigating, or for them to provide information that will help another investigator fill in a gap for a case that he or she might be investigating. The principle behind UFONet was to be able to establish a situation based on facts, not speculation, but facts. That was the original idea. But during the course of the last year, we've discovered that there are other areas within ufology that need to be delved into more than they have in the past. A good example is paranormal activity and its relationship to abductees and contactees. Now, for a period of time in the past, we looked upon abductees and contactees as being screwballs. Any serious research or investigation in this area was sort of frowned upon because we had no real way of proving that it happened. That's since changed. We've been able to establish that these things do indeed happen. There is some physical evidence that we've been able to see.
We've established that something happened.
Yeah.
Whether it is
as an abduction or contact, we don't know for sure. I mean, we have no real way of definitely saying, short of trotting out the alien themselves or filming them abducting someone. But here we get into a shadowy area, and that involves paranormal activity. Through the years, we've discovered that most contactees, people who've not had contact with each other, tell usually the same story in various different forms of either dreaming about being carried aboard an alien spacecraft, having medical tests performed on them. And it wasn't until Betty and Barney Hill came out, and their case was so well documented and researched by medical authorities and psychological authorities, that the tide suddenly began to shift in favor of acceptance of the abduction contactee scenario. And since then, more and more evidence has come out which supports the possibility that this has happened. But there is an area which has been totally ignored, and that is paranormal phenomena. I'm talking about things like poltergeist activity, precognition, balls of light floating through the room, books flying through the air, psychokinetic incidences, and this kind of thing. And surprisingly enough, recently, in performing research and going through old records of Dr. Leo Sprinkle, talking to people from all over the country, information that was gained from Paranet, we've discovered that there is a correlation of paranormal activity that goes back as far as 1963 of recorded incidents of this happening. And this is an area I think that we have to learn to look at a little bit more carefully without the prejudice that we have with regards to the dividing line between UFOs and psychic phenomena, because the research that I've done indicates that it's possible that they're interconnected.
Okay. How are we doing?
Time to time, so if I offend, I do apologize, but unfortunately, that's the way I am. First of all, before I begin, I would like to thank very much Mr. John Lear for making it possible for me to be here at this conference. I did not know whether or not I would be able to make it, and John made that possible, and he has my deepest gratitude because I've been looking forward for an opportunity like this for almost 10 years now. And also I'd like to thank the other speakers who very graciously donated some of their time to allow me to speak. I have 45 minutes, and in 45 minutes I have to condense 12 years of information and happenings. What I would like to do is speak for 30 minutes and then for 15 minutes accept questions from the floor. And I'd like to make a promise to you at this point that unlike certain people, I will not try to treat you like mushrooms by keeping you in the dark and feeding you bullshit. And that during the question and answer period, I will not ask myself questions and answer them for you. Give you a little background about myself. In 1976, while working for the United States government at RAF Chicksands, U.S. Air Force Base Security Services Command in Bedford, England, as a data analyst, I had the occasion to view a document entitled Grudge Bluebook Report number 13. Those of you who are aware of the history of Blue Book know that Grudge Bluebook, or Blue Book Report number 13, is a document that the government has sworn for years does not exist. Well, I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that's crap. It does exist. While employed by the government and fulfilling my duties, I analyzed that document. I read it very carefully. Over 600 pages. Over half of that was photographs. The content of that document consisted largely of technical reports, autopsy reports, and photographs of alien beings, alien technology, and sundry other things, which I will get into. And at this point, I would like to make mention that I find myself in a very, very poor position, which I am not entirely happy with, because I'm being forced to do something I swore up and down I would never do. And that is respond to last night's speaker, Mr. Bill Moore. And I will do that after I give you a brief rundown of the Blue Book 13 report. The version of the document that I saw was an annotated version. Mr. Cooper saw his version of the document in the early 70s. I saw my version of the same document in the mid-70s. My version of the document had been expanded considerably. A large portion of the document consisted largely of photographs. Photographs which showed alien beings, alive and dead. Microphotography photographs of tissue samples, lab reports of fluid samples, analytical data from the findings of tests, technical data concerning craft, power units, and possibly weapons. The general tone of the document itself was geared basically toward defense. How would we defend against something like this? How would we defend against the technology that was obvious and that was shown and reported upon in the document? Now, for the past 12 years, 8 of which I was in hiding, I have been called a liar, I have been called a drug addict, a pervert, a psychotic, you name it, and I've been called it. According to some, I am probably the most perverted son of a bitch you will meet in the entire world. And that's fine. After 12 years, I've become a little bit hard-shelled about the whole thing, and I don't particularly care. But there's something we have to understand. As a group of investigators, as a group of interested people, we have to cut through the crap. We have to pull together as a unified force and forget personalities, forget character assassination, forget all of the politics that exist within organizations, and unite in order to find the answers that we need to find. We have to do this. It's imperative. Part of our problem right now is we don't even know what the questions are. We have to cooperate with one another. Many of you have read John Lear's interview with me in Virginia of last year, in which he outlined much of what I've been saying for the past 12 years. I would suggest that you get a copy of this if you do not have it and read it. Simple fact of the matter is I can't tell you any more than has already been published in things like UFO Crash at Aztec by Bill Steinman and Wendell Stevens, or what has been published by John Lear. It's all there. And most of you, I'm sure, have touched upon the report or read the report and what was in the report. Unfortunately, I'm faced with a dilemma at this point, and that dilemma is this. I came here last night to listen to Mr. Moore. And I came here with the idea of being open-minded as I possibly could, understanding that people are entitled to their own opinion, their own feeling, for whatever reason. But there's a part of me that objects very strongly to being lied to. And that's exactly what happened last night. You were lied to. We sat up here in the audience and listened to a man expound on stuff that was absolute utter hogwash. Now, some of you are sitting out there saying, how can this be true? Why is it hogwash? He's a respected investigator. He's been in the business for a long time. He's published a book. He's published a couple of books. Yes, he has. His Roswell incident set new precedents for investigation in the UFO field, and he's to be commended for it. I admire him for it. It's an excellent book. He broke new ground for UFO investigators. What happened after that, I don't know. You heard Mr. Moore stand up here and say in 1980 or 1981, he was approached and given information by Falcon or Condor or whatever the buzzard's name was. That was a lie. It was an absolute lie. And I know it was a lie, because in 1979, 1 month after Mr. Moore arrived in the state of Arizona, thanks to Mr. Alan Benz, formerly of APRO, now for the Foundation of UFO Research, Mr. Moore and I met, at which point I related my information to Mr. Moore. We met not once, but twice. Several months later, Mr. Moore came to me, my place of business, in a little place called Trail Dust Town off Tanker Verde Road in Tucson, Arizona. We went across the street to a little place called the Parfait Palace. I had a bowl of chili, he had a cup of coffee. I had heartburn, and he had brain burn. Mr. Moore sat there for 2 hours, and we conversed. We discussed what I had related to him to begin with in the Blue Book documents. And I think ostensibly what he was trying to do was to see if he could catch me at a lie. See if I would tell him the same thing I told him before, which is fine. Any good investigator would do that. But somewhere along the line, Mr. Moore twisted it around. At that time, I had been discussing with Mr. Jerry Schultz, who had been passing through APRO, and apparently had been passing through APRO for several years at that point, with his bicycle and his little pup tent, some of the implications of what had been going on. Quite literally, whenever I was in the APRO office, Mr. Schultz was in the APRO office, and he grilled me extensively. Mr. Moore asked my opinion of Mr. Schultz. At that time, being fairly conservative and not as liberal as I am these days, I expressed the opinion that I thought Mr. Schultz was a bit different. Mr. Moore brought up the question of drugs, to which I responded, I don't know. It's possible. Anything's possible. I did not know the man well. I never did know the man well, contrary to what you might have heard from Mr. Schultz himself. We were never close, never have been close. Very shortly after that, due to circumstances which got a little bit out of control with regard to my activity and investigation, and the fact that very suddenly there were serious attempts against my life, it became appropriate for me to disappear. At which point I went into hiding for 8 years. Yesterday marked the first anniversary of me resurfacing into the UFO investigative community. Today marks the 13th anniversary of my viewing of the Grudge Bluebook Report number 13. 13 years ago today, in 1976, I viewed that document, and my life went to hell in a handcart. As a result of viewing that document, as I digress a little bit, I lost a wife and 2 kids. I reported to work as I normally do at Security Services Command at RAF Chick Sands. I was immediately told to report to the base commander's office on base, which I did, where I met Colonel Robert Black, then base commander at RAF Chick Sands. Colonel Black called me into his office and informed me that I was being discharged from my job and that I was being deported from the country as undesirable element. No explanation, no reason. That was it. It took me several months after my return to the United States to finally determine what had happened. I was not allowed to say goodbye to my wife or children, who remained in England, who remained at RAF Chick Sands for another 5 years, where she taught school at the RAF Chick Sands Dependent School. I have not seen my wife and sons in 12 years. I have not heard from them in 2 years. I have discovered ultimately that she was transferred to another Air Force base in England, where she teaches school still. I was not allowed to communicate with her in any way, shape, or form. I was not allowed to tell her what was going on, why it was going on. I did discover later that she had been told that I just walked in and quit and left the country. And left her. It's not true. Excuse me. It's not true, but that's what she was told. And any woman in her right mind who's left high and dry with 2 kids to take care of is going to think the worst. And that's understandable. Ultimately, after about 10 years, I divorced my wife, feeling that there was no way I could possibly salvage a marriage, and that after such a long separation, She had changed and I had changed, and I decided it was time to get on with my life. Ultimately, 2 years ago, I married a very wonderful lady with 2 kids of her own. I'm quite happy, and it looks like this marriage will last a long time. I hope it will, because she's about the only person I know that can put up with my shenanigans. She deserves a lot of credit, and I'd like you to know that she supports me, and I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing today without her support. During the last 12 years, there have been over 15 attempts on my life. I have been shot at, I've been stabbed, I've been blown up, I've contracted food poisoning, all the little things that are geared to look like nice little accidents. Now, some of you will say, well, if you were in such a secure position while you were hiding, why did you come back out? I was employed at a radio station in Lynchburg, Virginia, WLVA, Stereo 59. By this time, John Lear had tried to contact my father. My father is William J. English, Speaker of the House of Representatives for the state of Arizona. My father, being somewhat aware of my desire to maintain my anonymity, denied my existence to John, had his secretary deny my existence. And John, bless his heart, persisted. Persisted to the point where my father's secretary was so worked up and so upset, my father decided to forward John's phone number and a terse little note saying that he did not tell John where I was at or how to get in contact with me, and I damn well better take care of it because he was getting tired of it. I learned a long time ago it's not wise to cross my father. He has a nasty habit of getting what he wants. But I didn't respond to it immediately for 2 reasons. 1, I did not know John Lear. And 2, I really didn't feel that it was necessary at that point for me to come out of the closet and announce that the rumors of my demise were exaggerated. At this point, I would like to take the opportunity, I don't know if Mr. Andrus is here, but I would like to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Andrus. Because Mr. Andrus is directly responsible for me contacting Wendell Stevens. Mr. Andrus made a statement to ABC News, I believe it was. The statement was so out of character for what I knew from Walt Andrus that I had to consider it very carefully. While working at the radio station, I had the opportunity to view the pre-feeds that network sends down to radio stations so that you'll have an idea of what is going to come down the network news. In that statement, Mr. Andrus said that there are aliens on Earth, that we have been invaded, and that they are here. I found this extremely out of character for what I knew of Mr. Andrus. It was not the conservative person that I had known. Certainly wasn't the person that had been described to me by Coral Lorenzen, which I might add at that time was not complimentary at all. But shortly thereafter, I was on Coral's list also, so it didn't matter much. And I knew that I had made it, wherever made it was, because I was at the top of her list of people to avoid and to hate. I might add at this point, I have the dubious honor of being the only person that Coral has tried to sue. When Coral did that, I knew then and there that I had reached the top. But I will say this of Coral and Jim Lorenzen, they have my honor. They have my admiration. Whatever my personal feelings about Jim and Cora Lorenzen might be, they had the courage to do something that nobody else did, and they were the very first. Their work made it possible for all of you to be here today, and for that I am eternally grateful. To continue, and I apologize for digressing and going off into tangents, but that's the way I am. I read the statement that Mr. Andrus had made on the wire service, and I said, this can't be right. I don't believe this. After so many years, somebody of repute came forward and said, yes, it's true. And it was like a load was lifted off my back. That very night I contacted Wendell Stevens and said, Wendell. He said, yes. Who the hell are you? Bill English. Bullshit. No, really, it's Bill English, Wendell. Where the hell are you? I'm in Virginia. Virginia? I heard you were dead. We thought you were dead. Where have you been? So I rehashed the scenario with Wendell. Wendell, being a little bit more aware of what the circumstances were at the time and why I disappeared, could understand it. He told me, you know, you're in a book. To which I responded, no shit. He said, yeah, a fellow by the name of Bill Steinman and I wrote a book. Well, I helped him. No kidding. How do I get a copy of the book? Well, I'll send you one. Say, can I tell anybody that you're still there? Hell no. I don't want anybody to know I'm here. Send me the book and I'll talk to you. Several days later, I received the book in the mail and I sat down and read it. And I was greatly disturbed at what I read. Not because what was in the book was a lie. It wasn't. The information that was in the book was extremely accurate. Wendell had very faithfully seen to it that all the information was there. I was disturbed because after so many years I was forced to sit down and remember the circumstances that brought me to that point in my life. I then sat down with my wife and said, Valerie, I want you to read this. This is who I am. This is what I'm about. It's finally come out in the open. She read it. She said, is it true? I said, yes. And then she said, what are you going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? I said, well, what should we do about it? I don't know. I said, well, boy, you better get off your ass and get out there and start talking about it, because it's obvious somebody out there knows what's going on, and they had better get the straight information. And when she said that, I fell in love with that lady all over again. She had more courage than I did. Either that or she was extremely naive. But I like to think she was courageous. So, after reading the book and going through all that, I finally contacted John Lear. First time I contacted him, I posed as Bill English's lawyer. Called him up and said, I'm Mr. English's lawyer, legal attorney. He told me to contact you and find out what the hell you want. John told the lawyer what he wanted. He was very honest, very straightforward about it. I thanked him, hung up. And then I didn't call him back for about 2 weeks. Well, I considered everything. Finally, at the end of 2 weeks, I called him back. We talked for a few minutes. He asked if he could meet me in Virginia, and I said, yes, please do. At a great inconvenience to him and at much expense, he flew to Virginia to meet me, where I met him at the Lynchburg airport. Immediately upon his arrival, for the first time in 8 years, we were followed. The government knew where I was at. John came into the airport terminal. I was wearing a beard, grubby old Levi's, the blue vest that many of you have seen me walking around there in the last few days, my lucky vest. He sat down. He had no idea what I looked like. I sat down next to him, waited for a couple of minutes, turned around and looked at him and said, you can buy me a drink, let's go. And John, being the trooper that he is, didn't say a word. Got up, grabbed his bag, and walked out the door. Our trails followed us out the door. We jumped in John's car and headed to a local bar, where John bought me a drink. Two gentlemen followed us into the bar. John and I scooted out of the bar and headed for my home. The next few days, John very graciously, but very thoroughly, grilled me. Reminded me of things that I had not remembered for many years. My chief concern when I spoke to Mr. Lear was I did not know him and I did not want to come off as an idiot. I did not want him to think that I was another nutcase. It wasn't until about a month later when Mr. Lear sent me a copy of his report on meeting with me that I finally had an idea of what he thought of me, and I was deeply gratified to see that he believed me. Mr. Lear is officially retiring from active UFO investigations, and I cry for it. Objectively, he has not been in the field for very long, but what he has done has been phenomenal. Mr. Lear is perhaps one of the finest men I know. Whatever else you might think of him as an investigator, as a controversial figure, as a human being, the man has heart. And there's damn few of us anymore that can say that about anybody. Now that I've covered, for the most part, what I've had to say with regard to reviewing some of the circumstances which have brought me here tonight, it's now necessary for me to address the question of Mr. Moore. Last night, Mr. Moore stood up here and said, we must stop the character assassination. We must stop the infighting. We must stop the disinformation. And as he was saying that, I was walking around the back of this auditorium about ready to pop a cork because the man was standing there telling you a bald-faced lie. Yeah. He has not stopped the character assassination, and he never did. 9 months ago, when Mr. Moore discovered that I had resurfaced, he was asked by 2 engineers from Aerojet Corporation what he thought of me and my viewing of the documents that I said I had viewed. To which he responded, Bill English told me that he and Jerry Schultz were doing LSD when they wrote the Blue Book summation. This is a documented fact. Bill did in fact say this, and I have a letter from him stating that he said it. And I have that letter here today. It's in the possession of Mr. John Lear because I gave it to him yesterday morning. That statement is an out-and-out lie. I never made such a statement to Mr. Moore. In fact, I do not do drugs. I have a hard time taking drugs, even those prescribed by the doctor. I said nothing at that point because I wanted to wait and see what else was going to happen. Then Mr. Moore came out with that Bukaka UFO television show of his, which in my estimation was designed to do nothing more than to discredit the science of ufology. And that's exactly what it did. It was poorly produced, poorly written, and it made UFO investigators look like absolute, utter idiots. And it was the cruelest blow that anybody could have hit UFO investigators with. To add insult to injury, Mr. Moore had his two buzzards pronounce the stuff that he said I'd been lying about for 13 years. Word for word, they parroted everything that I had told him in 1979. 1 hour after viewing this travesty, I got on the telephone to Alan Benz and got Mr. Moore's phone number. Alan is here tonight. He will confirm this. Bill was in Washington, D.C. I spoke with Mr. Chandra. I told Mr. Chandra that I wanted a piece of Mr. Moore's ass so bad I was ready to crawl through the phone and bite him on the ear.
All right!
I told Mr. Chandra that that show was bullshit. That a man who for 12 years had said that Bill English is a liar and a drug addict and a paranoid schizophrenic and every kind of perverse son of a bitch that you can imagine produced a television show that parroted everything that I had been saying for 12 years. My question at that time was, if I'm such a liar, why would you produce a piece of crap like this and have someone say that? My question now is, after producing that piece of shit, why would you stand in front of an audience of qualified, intelligent people and tell them that it was a disinformation ploy? Another lie. Quite frankly, if Mr. Moore is not in this for the money, then what the hell is he in it for? He's not done any good for UFO investigation that I can determine, except hurt it. I would like to take this opportunity right now to apologize to you and to those of you who support Mr. Moore, but facts are facts. Whatever you may think of me, tomorrow morning I will get up and wash my face and go to the bathroom and put my pants on just like most of you do. I will be here tomorrow. Many of you came to this meeting today saying, we are going to get some answers. And I apologize to you because I don't have any answers for you. I don't even know what the questions are anymore. I do know that we as a body must pull together, not only in MUFONs, but in CUFOs, Center for International UFO Studies, all of the UFO organizations that are in existence today must put aside their political aspirations, must put aside the politics of their organization, must put aside their personal feelings. We must. It's imperative if we are going to accomplish anything. It has long been my central repository of records and information. Do it in such a manner that all organizations can access the information. Thanks to a gentleman by the name of Mr. Richard Scheffler out of Alamogordo, New Mexico, that dream has come true. In the last 2 months, we have established a computerized news and information service devoted strictly to UFO information. Quality UFO information. The information that goes into this board will be approved by a board of approval consisting of several investigators of renown who are in fact members of various UFO organizations. Many of the members of this board do not like each other. Many of the members of this board do not agree with each other. Many of the members of this board hate each other's guts. We don't care. Whatever your opinions and personal conflicts might be, the members of this board are charged with the duty of checking over whatever information is submitted to the UFONet Bulletin Board for content, investigative technique. We do not editorialize. Whatever is submitted will be put on the computer exactly as it was submitted. There will be no deletions. There will be no editorial comment added to it. Nothing. What you see will be the original document. It is my hope that we, as an organization of human beings, can gather together and use this service to find the disinformation, to make a determination as to what is true or not true, employ scientific technique in the investigation of UFOs, and establish a firmer, more solid foundation for this science of ours. And that's exactly what this is. This is a science. We have no established criteria per se for investigators, but we hope eventually that will take place and that ufology will be recognized as a genuine, bona fide field. For those of you who are not aware of my particular situation, it's time for the commercial. I have on sale in front a situation and update report. If you would like, please come. They are there. Right now, I'd like to open up the floor to questions. If there's anybody who has a question, please feel free to ask it. I will answer it to the best of my ability. If I cannot answer it, I will be honest and tell you I don't know. Yes, dear. Yes.
I would like to ask some questions.
Please do.
Would you comment about the Philadelphia experiment, Einstein and Marilyn Monroe? A little joke there for levity.
To be perfectly honest with you, the only thing I know about the Philadelphia experiment is what I saw in the movie. I cannot give you a qualified opinion about the book. And what was the rest of your question?
Well, I was wondering, in connection with that, about the mystery connected with Einstein's involvement with the Philadelphia experiment and the rumors about Marilyn Monroe being not only beautiful but intelligent, and her connection with the Kennedys, and why Jackie Kennedy kept quiet about everything. Was she also perhaps in fear for her life?
My dear lady, you are asking me questions that I have absolutely no knowledge at all on.
I see.
I'm sorry, I can't answer them for you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, can you talk about the circumstances where you reviewed this Report 13 in England? You were in the service there, or
no,
a little more detail?
I was a civilian employee. I was employed by the Department of Defense Security Services Command. The document came across my desk in a diplomatic pouch with a disposition form instructing me to analyze the document, assign it a probability rate as to whether or not it was true, whatever. All I did was my job, which was essentially analyze the document that was presented in my inbox and write a summation of it.
Thank you.
Yes, Bill, will you discourse at length about some of the contents of this document and just get into it for about 5 minutes and tell us some of the things that you saw, and above all, some of your feelings towards this material. What were you feeling? What was it like to read this? And tell us about this material, because as a ufologist, I'm more interested in the flying saucers than I am about the petty squabbles between the researchers, you know what I mean?
At the time when I read the document, it was reported in the document that the United States had in its possession several UFOs. Technological reports showed that on a few of them they had been dismantled. There was a photograph of what was labeled as an atomic generator or a nuclear power unit, which was no bigger than a basketball. The inside of the craft showed what were control boards with strange writing on them. I'm not a linguist, so I couldn't begin to tell you what it said. There was a great deal of stuff, a lot of things that just dealt I was more interested, to be honest with you, in the autopsy pictures. Several of the autopsy pictures showed alien cadavers on autopsy tables that had been vivisectioned. Several photographs showed an alien head which had been removed from the body, cut in half, which showed brain casings. Some of these photographs were in color, some of them were in black and white. One particular photograph that I remember distinctly was that of three aliens shoved up against what appeared to be a white tile wall, in which they looked very confused, and a photograph of them was taken. I'm sorry? Live aliens. Does that answer your question? Yes, sir, May.
Isn't it true, Bill, that our government believed for quite some time that these Greys boasted that they created Jesus Christ? I know it's kind of heavy, and I just figured I'd drop it on you.
It is rumored that this is in fact what has taken place. It's rumored that because of biogenetic engineering, Jesus Christ was engineered by the aliens. Quite honestly, I have no knowledge of this. I'm not a theologian. And to be perfectly honest with you, that is a topic that I am afraid to even approach, for the simple fact that it is so hot I would get burned.
I appreciate that, and thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, as a civilian employee and privileged to that kind of information, I wonder what it was that led to them flopping that on your desk, and what your direct reaction to information about UFOs Did you have any previous orientation toward UFOs, or?
Perfectly frank with you, I had no interest in UFOs whatsoever. I had no knowledge of them. We found the aircraft. We were supposed to bring out survivors if there were any. There were none. At that time, I had no concept of UFOs, ufology, mutilations whatsoever. We found the entire crew still in their safety harnesses in their seat in the aircraft. The aircraft had not crashed. It was perfectly intact. The only visible damage that we could see was the fact that the engine pods were damaged because the aircraft was sitting on them. The crew had been mutilated in every classical sense of the word, as described by Linda Howell in her book. Of cattle mutilations. We photographed the bodies, we grabbed dog tags, we destroyed the aircraft with the bodies in it. We returned to our assigned base. The photographs were forwarded to MACV headquarters in Saigon. This was the last I ever saw of them until 1976 when they appeared in the Grudge Bluebook 13 report. And I recognized them as being the photographs that I took. So I had no doubt whatsoever as to the authenticity of the document.
Do you think that they knew that, handing you the file for your analysis?
It's entirely possible. It's entirely possible. I could have been set up. I don't know.
And then beyond that, after you did analyze it and write your report, I'm unfamiliar with that, so I'm just wondering if that was what led directly to your ousting in the service.
I believe it was. I believe it was.
Thank you.
Next question, please. We're running short on time. I hope you don't feel slighted if I cut you off, but I'll try and get as many in as I can, so please make it brief.
Okay. I understand you had 1 day to analyze the report. That's the recollection I have from reading about the report. And it was not until sometime later that you tried to reproduce the report from memory.
I'm sorry, say again. I had a difficulty.
It was sometime later when you tried to kind of regenerate the report from memory from your 1 day or so. Can you characterize if you think that your recollection of the report was complete, or to what extent do you think you were able to kind of regurgitate what you actually saw?
Initially, it was about 95%. After 13 years, it's probably a little bit less.
That's actually a very high percentage. Is that just your talent?
I have an idyllic memory.
Okay. Your what? Your what?
I have an idyllic memory.
Eidetic.
Eidetic. All right, yeah. I got it, but I can't say it. Yes, sir.
We were shown a videotape narrated by Rod Serling of the landing at Holloman Air Force Base. And the aliens' faces were described with large noses. And that contradicts most of the descriptions we've heard about the popularly published descriptions of the aliens. The photos that you saw of the cadavers, did they suggest faces like those that we saw in that tape? And how do you explain that discrepancy?
You see some of the gentlemen walking around here with these strange white tags hanging off their collars. It's a picture of an alien. That pretty much characterized what they look like in the pictures that I saw. It's entirely possible that those aliens which landed at Holloman Air Force Base were of a different species. I do not know.
I have a question about a book that I discovered being mentioned in the Flying Saucer Review. In fact, being debunked and ridiculed there, and actually found a bookstore in Los Angeles. The book called Urantia. And when I opened it, the thing that grabbed my attention was mentioning of universes, super universes, central universes, local universes, and so on. And having some background in physics, in engineering, and being interested in different dimensions, I said, well, gee, interesting. Got the book, and I've been reading it carefully all these months. It was written in 34, 35, translated into English in the subsequent years, probably distributed through
Your point, sir, please. We're running short on time.
My question is, did you find any mentioning of this book in the documents that you came in contact with? Because in the book there are many chapters that will describe alien anatomies of different dozens of cases.
Well, first of all, I'm not familiar with the book. What I saw in the document was technically oriented. There was made mention of the possibility of interdimensional travel, but at that point, and now, I have no knowledge of physics whatsoever. So I could not answer you
It's
honestly.
not a book about dimensions, it's more a book about life in the universe and the different types of beings in the universe, and they would have chapters and chapters of listing of different biological types of entities, a lot of knowledge in chemistry, in physics, astronomy, and so on.
Having not read the book, I can't give you an honest and qualified answer. Last question.
Yes, Bill. We hear that the aliens are very good at telepathy. Now, if in the early days the aliens were mistreated by humans, don't you think that that was conveyed to the alien nation early on? And as a result, I mean, don't you think they're waiting to get even or have gotten even?
Well, not being telepathic, I can't answer that question, unfortunately. If they are telepathic, I would imagine that if one knows, they all know. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you very much for allowing me this time, and thank you for listening to me.